My name is Lisa Ann Whitmer Wagman. I just moved here because I'm getting a divorce. My husband will not give me any money. The lawyer won't help me. My husband won't help me. My dad, Marlon Lee Whitmer, he's a minister, won't help me. My stepmother won't help me. I have a 20-year-old daughter, and she is not helping me because she's 20. She's scared. She doesn't want her parents to separate.
Ma'am, we're discussing the rezoning for the Portillos. Do you have any comments on that?
For what?
Freestyle. Well, let me sit back.
Okay. Years ago, they tried to.
Well. How the turntables
Put me in it. This is live.
Cringe content. The relatively new genre of stomach-turning, wince-inducing, eye-squinting, awful material that seems to be the internet's life support these days. It's the clip of a guy getting his $85,000 proposal turned down, it's those archived compilations of American Idol rejects, it's a Dhar Mann video, it's that train wreck of a post, clip, TikTok, or overall online persona that makes us want to fold in on ourselves, but for some reason, you just can't look away. And since it's one of my favorite brands of comedy, in certain contexts, and modern geniuses like Larry David, Sacha Baron Cohen, and Ricky Gervais have pretty much turned this stuff into a contemporary art form, I thought what better way to explore the viscerally embarrassing yet highly addictive appeal of this type of content than through a YouTube essay. You guys know the drill. So the artistry of manufactured cringe can be traced as far back as the era of classic 90s comedies, and even further back to the days of Monty Python. Humor through the lens of uncomfortable, absurd situations had been building itself an audience among mainstream film and television viewers. If you want to get really technical though, this stuff actually has its roots in black or dark comedy, which has its origins in the works of 18th century writer and one of the earliest satirists of English literature, Jonathan Swift. Dude was actually considered the originator of black or dark humor, typically making light or witty stories out of normally taboo subjects at the time, like death, suffering, general class issues. But not to dive too deep into that, whether you're reading the prose of a centuries-old poet or watching the iconic shenanigans of John Cleese, Ted Stroman, and Alan Partridge, these works had one specific goal in common: to make you squirm and feel as uncomfortable as possible, yet somehow in the thick of discomfort, making for hilarious entertainment. In short, they were meant to make you revel in that sweet, glorious cringe. Situations that are meant to make you feel both embarrassed for the subject and entertained by their flagrant stupidity, misjudgment, or social unawareness. Among movies banking on this sort of comedy at the time, scatology or toilet humor was often their cringe content of choice, while TV shows often went with the approach of situational comedy, or scenarios of social embarrassment. But I'll get more into that later on in this video. So why exactly do we cringe? What causes us to feel that same level of shame or embarrassment as the subject of ridicule, or even when they have none, project that shame or embarrassment we think they should feel onto them? As social creatures, this pretty much comes down to our human instinct to feel empathy, where we're able to place ourselves in another person's shoes, helping us understand or share in their feelings or emotions. It's a necessary reaction and an evolutionary tool that can lead to a more harmonious, helpful, and cooperative society, because it helps promote this selfless, pro-social behavior. When we cringe or feel secondhand embarrassment for someone, we're subconsciously placing ourselves in their exact situation, having us feel this vicarious sense of shame, knowing that what they're doing is graceless at best and offensive at worst. There's actually a German term for this vicarious embarrassment known as Fremdscham. Definitely ruined that one. And it's a feeling that's all the more intensified when the person being cringy is oblivious to the fact that they are, and we're projecting the shame we think they should be feeling onto them. In some cases, we may even feel a bit of sympathy, because we've probably been there before, or it's one of our personal social nightmares come to life. Other times, compassion may be completely absent, and we may feel this colder response of disgust, and just sort of a cautionary boost in our social awareness of how not to behave. It's therefore a crucial human function that can help us determine what the current social norms are and when we or someone else violates them. Painful as it may be to watch a glorious social train wreck, it's this instinctive empathy that keeps our eyes glued to the hot mess before us.
But it is gonna bother you because you're human, and I was human. I am human, still. But I was just referring to myself in the past. Not that I was not human.
We're subconsciously and morbidly fascinated over what went wrong and why. Maybe even thinking, have I been that cringy or awkward in similar scenarios? And in a similar vein, it can even trigger some deep-seated fears or anxieties of ever finding ourselves in the same boat. And like I said, depending on whether you react out of sympathy or disgust, here is where you'll experience one of either two main types of cringe. One of compassion, and one of contempt. And brilliantly enough, the rise of the fine art we now know as cringe comedy often makes beautiful use of both. If you've ever been blessed with the presence of Borat, Michael Scott, or Larry David on screen, then you've stumbled upon Hollywood's modern masters of cringe humor. The kind of humor that's designed to play out some of your worst social horrors on screen, satirizing or making light of these common cultural faux pas. And as simple as the formula may seem, the genre makes for a particularly visceral, cathartic type of comedy, one that can have you painfully relate to the characters or feel deeply mortified by their actions and choices. A lot of the time with these comedies, though, you typically get the best kind of viewing experience, where you feel both. And while there doesn't seem to be a definitive origin for this type of mainstream comedic cringe, I feel like we can safely owe much of its popularity to Larry David's groundbreaking and legendary HBO hit, Curb Your Enthusiasm. Now, if you've yet to witness this masterpiece, I envy you. I wish I could relive the adventures of our Cringe King with fresh eyes. Never have I seen a comedy make such masterful entertainment out of the literal mundanities and interactions of everyday life, and maintain consistent quality throughout its 10-season run, and counting, too. Curb basically follows the fictionalized version of the Seinfeld writer and producer, Larry David, who attempts to live his semi-retired life amidst the eccentricities of LA. And similarly to Seinfeld, there aren't many frills, bells, or whistles added to the overarching story here. It's literally just about a guy living his daily life, but the cringe entertainment comes from his phenomenal tactlessness and social ineptitude paired with his arrogance and cocky disregard for social conventions. Oftentimes he actually even insists that others follow his particular social rules and beliefs, which honestly makes for some of the funniest moments in the show.
Come on, front. I'm good. Are you serious? Larry, I'm not gonna drive you around like I'm your chauffeur. Get in the fucking front seat, all right?
You're gonna drive me around like I'm a chauffeur with 2 minutes from the rehearsal hall.
You know, what kind of person asks another person to drive them around like this? This kind of mentality is what's...
What kind of person is so insecure that they have to make somebody move into the front seat so they don't think that they're driving somebody around?
But then there are also times where he's not actually in the wrong. Sometimes he's just a victim of grand misunderstandings. This way the writers can make sure that he's not a total asshole of a character and makes for some agonizingly relatable moments. In short, it's a brilliant series that's turned embarrassing or frustrating social interactions into a cinematic craft, and as wonderfully as the New York Times puts it, Mr. David orchestrates comic awkwardness with the pacing, precision, and panache of Hitchcock, meticulously setting audiences up for a scare. Couldn't have said it better otherwise. But our awkward king would soon be joined by what Hollywood would consider one of its most iconic cringe lords to date, Sacha Baron Cohen. In the same year as Curb, TV audiences were gifted with the presence of Ali G, a fictional character crafted by Baron Cohen in his own self-titled TV series, The Ali G Show. The dude's antics would soon make the comedian the quintessential face of outrageous satire and shameless quality cringe comedy. As a caricature of a British suburban male whose persona and mannerisms are an appropriated, exaggerated mix of British, Jamaican, and hip-hop cultures, Ali G gave new meaning to public pranks and trolling, conducting various ridiculous interviews with unsuspecting public figures across both the UK and the US. But these aren't just your half-assed, Sam Pepper-style works of public nuisance, no. Baron Cohen truly commits to his role as a dim-witted journalist who isn't specifically out to cause trouble, but who's often just ignorant and wholly unaware of their social insensitivities, put lightly. The same goes for his two other characters that appear in the show, the irreverent Austrian fashion reporter Bruno, and the man who practically made the actor's name, everyone's favorite television journalist, Borat. from the glorious nation of Kazakhstan. And unless you hardly watch movies or manage to pleasantly avoid the obnoxious teenagers of the early 2000s who would just spit the same lines over and over, you very likely at least heard of this cringe comedy god. Because the man knows no social fear. Whenever you think he's not gonna go there, he does, and beyond. The hilarity of Baron Cohen's stunts comes from the embarrassment of his interviewees. They know the character often means no harm. He's just an idiot, so should they be polite and play along? Should they tell him off? Should they just get the hell out of there? The responses vary, and since no one's getting hurt but Baron Cohen's dignity itself, and sometimes deservedly that of certain victims, it makes for some pretty priceless, if not absolutely cringe-worthy comedy. And last but not least, this true-to-life documentary-style format would then soon see widespread popularity through Ricky Gervais's magnum opus, The Office. Now, I know I've aggressively promoted the two previous shows, and I promise you, if you're a fan of cringy situational comedy, you're gonna have a good time. But if you've yet to see The Office, particularly the US version starring Steve Carell, I'm biased, don't come at me, then that's your homework after this video. Go watch it, it's on Aussie Netflix for all my fellow viewers down under. Ooh, sorry, America. Now, while I love the American version and I personally enjoy it more than the BBC original, I've still gotta give it to Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant. The two managed to make amazing entertainment out of our morbid attraction to the cringy and sometimes even offensive social blunders of others, and have paved the way for an excellent remake and a couple more mockumentary-style sitcoms later on, banking on that same situational cringe comedy. And best of all, like Curb, they managed to spin this comedic enjoyment out of something as mundane and unexciting as the office of a failing paper company. Gervais undoubtedly carries this show as the protagonist David Brent, a bordering on deluded office manager who constantly attempts to win the approval and love of his colleagues, though often in incredibly tactless, rude, and socially awkward ways. The man is literally the picture of anti-cool, and yet he puts himself up on a pedestal. And it's here where we can pinpoint the common key ingredient in mastering cringe-based humor. All subjects are often incredibly socially awkward or offensive, and yet carry an air of intense overconfidence and even narcissism. It adds to the feeling of watching the social equivalent of a car crash. We're sucked in by how bad a character could f up a social interaction, all the while remaining incredibly unapologetic and even egotistic. However, for this type of comedy to work, the story would also have to make most other characters at least aware of the star's self-centeredness, reacting in the realistic, socially acceptable ways you'd expect.
And if I had a gun with 2 bullets and I was in a room with Hitler, Bin Laden, and Toby, I would shoot Toby twice.
Okay,
All right.
They can't have the others responding in approval, otherwise we're just watching a show about a glorified asshole. Or plural, which can typically send a questionable message. The side characters are thus meant to be stand-ins for the actual audience themselves. But the directional style of these comedies also plays a key role. Those that apply this type of humor best often do away with the laugh track altogether, and I mean really, it's 2021. We are strong, independent viewers. We don't need to be told when to laugh. Instead, successful cringe comedy relies heavily on realism, opting for a mockumentary-style format rather than your conventional sitcom setup. The more realistic it feels, the more cathartic and hard-hitting the cringe will be, and a documentary style of direction will allow us and the on-screen characters to stew in the many painful moments of dead air or silence following an awkward stunt or failed social interaction. According to Ash Atala, producer of the BBC Office, the essence of cringe comedy is to not let your characters off the hook. In real life, and often in television, you look away. But with mockumentary style, if a character is under pressure, you keep the lens on them. He compares this to how traditional comedy often has its characters stride in, spit a funny line or two, and walk out the scene, calling the sort of format too artificial in an era where most people now crave more authenticity. Of course, Hollywood has released plenty more cringe comedies since, though these three have definitely set the stage for its popularity and arguably remain just as hilarious to this day. But here's the thing, unpleasant as it may be to see someone fail or to feel embarrassed for others, even if they're just fictional characters on screen, why does it still manage to be so goddamn funny? Like I described, these guys are hot messes, and yet we laugh at their transgressions, even if at the same time, we may also feel sympathy for some of them. In her book, Cringeworthy: How to Make the Most of Uncomfortable Situations, Melissa Dahl attributes this to our empathetic tendency to project yourselves in the same situation as a fictional character on screen. When we watch something embarrassing, we then also tend to feel like the same experience is happening to us, which can often feel so intense or cathartic that we end up laughing laughing to release that tension. This specific cringe reaction, though, comes from a place of compassion. We're engaged and amused by such content because we can see ourselves in the character's shoes, and are reminded by our own similar social failures or experiences in the past. We laugh because we relate. It's a way to sort of subconsciously cope or make light of our own previous social gaffes. However, cringe entertainment can land on the other end of that spectrum, where we're humored from a place of contempt rather than compassionate understanding. It's here where we laugh not because we feel sympathy for a character's blunders, but rather feel a sense of superiority knowing we're better people. That we'd never be caught dead doing that. A lot of the time the subject may be someone who we feel deserves it, whose head may be so far up their ass that you kind of feel like, yeah, you need to be taken down a peg. When David Brent mouths off on his off-color jokes, much to the horror of his colleagues, it's a social scenario that makes us cringe and laugh. Not with the guy, of course, but rather at him and the ridiculousness of his actions. We're laughing at him because we know he's being terrible to others, and yet he seems so blissfully ignorant of it. We laugh because we feel he deserves it, because he's meant to be unlikable for the most part. He does get a redemption arc, sort of, in his own movie. And the same thing goes for Baron Cohen's works. We know his characters are meant to be outrageous, unsympathetic cartoons, and we both cringe and are morbidly entertained by the social consequences of his actions, or will cringe and laugh at the people he exposes for having questionable or bigoted views. It could be a gay conversion pastor, a bar of redneck racists, or a politician running backwards, ass up with his pants down to supposedly intimidate terrorists. This is linked to the German term Schadenfreude, or feeling pleasure in watching the misery of others. In this context, it's that feeling of, thank God I'm not this horrible person. And some of the best comedies provoke both of these reactions. Curb in the US Office, for example, have us feel both compassionate and contemptuous cringe for its lead characters. They can act like assholes for much of the show, but other times they do mean well, or are simply a victim of misunderstanding. And sometimes these fictionalized events can have us gain a deeper understanding of general social behavior. But these are fictional works. They're offering us a manufactured cringe experience, while having the benefit of character development, of showing us that obnoxious, ignorant assholes can change or are simply misunderstood. Cringe content, however, isn't exclusive to the realm of TV or movies. These days, with our everyday growing use of the internet, our craving for cringe humor can be immediately satisfied through the media spread across our current social channels. With millions of users now rapidly sharing their own content across cyberspace, many place themselves at risk of unwittingly providing the cringe entertainment for another. And while many of these are admittedly very amusing and have inadvertently given birth to many successful commentary channels today, the recent intense consumption and virality of these posts poses the question, or rather two questions: what constitutes as cringe content exactly in the online realm? And where's the line between harmlessly sharing and enjoying it and just plain cyber harassment? And here we go, my favorite pastime, diving into the internet at its worst. But just before I do that, shout out to the sponsor of today's video, Skillshare. You ever cringe at your own voice? Yeah. Thought so. Despite the fact that I've made a total of 22 videos on this channel so far, I still can't avoid that initial feeling of disgust when I hear my voice in the video editor. But I found in the early days of making videos that sounding clear and confident could at least reduce the amount of self-cringe I feel when I hear my own voice. I mean, it's still a bit uncomfortable, but it's made even worse if I can hear a trace of nervousness or self-doubt behind the camera. I mean, of course, tons of practice has helped over time, but luckily, Skillshare also provides a large category of classes to help creators like me improve on this skill and coach those who are just starting out. As you might have heard, Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes aimed at creatives, from technical skills in graphic design and filmmaking to soft skills in productivity and self-confidence. And like I mentioned, their catalog includes training in confident on-camera presence, particularly the ability to sound clear and engaging. One class I found particularly helpful, and maybe you'll too, is the one by content creator Nathaniel Drew, aptly titled How to Speak Confidently on Camera, a guide for content creators. The dude offers simple yet highly effective advice for forming a captivating, authentic camera presence, along with additional tips on scripting, editing, and handling online criticism. And the best thing about it is, it's straight from his own experience as a veteran YouTuber himself. And you also don't need to worry about ads while doing these classes, since the platform is focused specifically on learning. Plus, they're constantly launching new premium classes for you to explore. And the platform is now currently offering a 1-month free trial of their Skillshare Premium membership for the first 1,000 subs to click the link in my description. So yeah, it's a free try, go check it out, and maybe learn to not totally hate the sound of your own voice. And now we can bask in the wonderful online cesspools of internet cringe culture. Unlike the classic cringe comedies I've mentioned, cringe content on the internet is posted by just your average internet user. And granted, much of these may very well be created with the intention of making you wince or confused. After all, we do live in an era where bizarre, absurd comedy is very much a thing, so it's not hard to find instances of manufactured or self-aware cringe online. The trend has actually also given rise to a beautiful new genre of music known simply as cringe pop. And if you've ever been subjected to the catchy hooks of Pen Pineapple Apple Pen, Friday, or God forbid, What Does the Fox Say?, then you've definitely had more than your fair share of cringe pop tunes. These types of songs are typically characterized by their absurdity, constant lyrical repetition, or low production value, or a combination of all three. And like the examples earlier, some of these are intentionally absurd or cringeworthy. I'm gonna give these two dudes in particular the benefit of the doubt. Surely they knew that these wouldn't be taken that seriously, but others were, unfortunately, made in earnest, such as the viral sensation known as Friday by now YouTuber Rebecca Black. Now, for being real, her song is not great, and yes, the sloppy lyrics and direction made for unintentional comedy, but the internet can take it way too far with these things and went to the lengths of harassing the then 13-year-old girl with actual death threats. Am I surprised? No, just disappointed. And here are where the risks and sometimes even dangers that online cringe content can crop up, as funny as that sounds. Yeah, it is fascinating and sometimes even entertaining to view an absolute train wreck of a situation that's meant to be taken seriously. Once again, it's a result of our empathetic nature. We're attracted to this content because it's often this grand spectacle of someone violating social norms or expectations. Sometimes it's something we might relate to, sometimes it's something we're humored by because we find it ridiculous. It's the same attraction we feel towards the fictional genre of cringe comedy, except this time we're dealing with actual people. And with the ability to immediately share and comment on the stuff we see online, you will get the bad eggs who can take it way too far. Like with the case of Rebecca Black, we can see that people aren't afraid to run entire harassment campaigns against you for posting cringe online. A similar case would be Jessie Slaughter, a victim of doxing and intense online harassment, after posting a smug video online attempting to respond to their, quote, haters. Keep in mind that they were 11 years old at the time, but that didn't stop 4chan from distributing their real name, address, and phone number across the internet. On an albeit less extreme level, you may find yourself publicly humiliated in one of YouTube's cringe compilations or some douchebag's commentary video for no other reason than to have others point and laugh at your physical appearance, your identity, or the fact that you have a disability. In the cases where people feel the need to publicly punch down on the vulnerable, especially for things that they can't change, doesn't it reflect a whole lot worse on them rather than their subject of ridicule? At that point, I honestly feel like the one doing the punching is fathoms more cringy than the person they're trying to paint as such. And to be clear, this is not to say that that natural knee-jerk reaction of cringing at something, whether they deserve it or otherwise, automatically makes you the bad guy. It's really where you go from there. I mean, despite the fact that these people's actions and choices were cringeworthy, the backlash just seems wildly disproportionate, and in other cases just overall unnecessary. Also, I think an interesting thing worth pointing out, and disclaimer, I'm not a psychologist, this is just a theory I've seen some other people share, and I do agree with it to some extent. But sometimes, when we look down and cringe at someone who fails to meet our personal ideals, perhaps, in some cases, we might be seeing a little bit of ourselves in them. Maybe we see parts of ourselves that we subconsciously or deeply loathe or feel shame for, manifested in the actions of this person. And in an almost panicked effort to convince ourselves that we're not this person, rather than exercise understanding, we distance ourselves or place ourselves above that person by pointing and laughing and yelling, "Cringe!" The amazing ContraPoints actually made a fantastic video on this that I'm not even gonna attempt to rival. She basically explores the effects of popular cringe content online and its influence on the political spheres of YouTube, and more on the psychology of why this sort of thing can get super addictive and a lot of the time to unhealthy degrees. It is so well done, and I'm not gonna spoil it, so links in the description. In summing up this video, is there a definitive way of describing what cringe content is? See, it's easy to do so with comedies when there's a set formula for the characters, the story, the direction. Here, cringe is clearly defined by your uncool ass cool leads, realistic social reactions, and enough dead air to have you sinking in your seat. And it's meant to elicit laughs through relatability or a karmic message. But online, the popularization of this type of humor almost has no defining traits or boundaries. You also get your intentional cringe content, but sometimes you'll find a post or video that can unintentionally offer cringe-worthy entertainment for the viewer. What functions as cringe content online can thus be pretty subjective and hard to define. A lot of people seem to think vegans are cringe, though many would also argue that it's just another dietary lifestyle. Hell, many think cosplay is a cringe hobby, and I don't find it any different from any other nerdy interest out there. It almost seems like anyone can fall under the category of cringe on the internet. It's all dependent on who the viewer is. Interestingly enough, while the compassionate type of cringe isn't rare online per se, this contemptuous type of cringe response seems to be the most popular trend. Most of the stuff you'll find in cringe compilations, Reddit, or lolcow are the sorts of content you can sneer at, rather than feel a sense of human bond over. Perhaps then, if I had to say one definitive, cynical thing about online cringe, since we're dealing with real-world people, most of it seems to primarily serve as content that subconsciously makes us feel better about ourselves, mean-spirited as some instances may be. That feeling of, I may be a mess right now, but at least I'm not on TLC making love to a car. But that about does it for this one. As always, I'd love to hear what you guys think, so feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments. Also, I am in dire need of a new cringe type comedy to watch. I've just finished Eastbound and Down, aka Danny McBride's best work. I feel like him, Will Ferrell, and Adam McKay have mastered the art of satirizing the most obnoxious people in society. If you're into super irreverent, absurd comedies with cringy situational humor, kind of like Talladega Nights or Pineapple Express, I highly recommend you give it a watch. But also, if you know of other shows like it, please recommend and feed my TV addictions, thank you. And of course, if you haven't yet and enjoy these sorts of pop culture commentary / video essays, consider subscribing and maybe even hitting that notification bell to keep up to date on my latest uploads. Shout out again to Skillshare for being a huge support to this channel, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.
It's getting hot in here, so take off all your clothes. I'm getting so hot, I wanna take my robe off. It's getting hot in here, so take off all your